Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, March 11th, 2025. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about resistance, learning how to deal with resistance. I'm going to borrow some of the ideas that I talk about when I teach my therapy class to inform our other relationships. I thought about this originally when I was thinking about it in the context of the identified patient, typically the child in a family, but it doesn't have to be the child. But really, I want to talk about resistance in the context of any relationship we have, maybe most importantly, the relationship that we have with ourselves. Before I get it deeply into tonight's topic, I just want to talk about the upcoming events. We have our Finding You Intensive. In fact, we filled up the Finding You Intensive and now it is unfilled. We have one spot. Somebody had to postpone. So I am running the Finding You Intensive next week, March 19th. If it happens to coincide with your schedule that you can make that work and you want to work with me, March 19th through 23rd is that next offering. After that, we have the April 23rd Finding You Intensive. That will be run by my marvelous and very skilled daughter, Emma Reedy June. My attachment-based therapy class, the upcoming one, I'll announce the next one soon. We put that on the schedule, so that will be coming up. Our next iteration of the Conscious Parenting Workshop is also in the queue. I just realized that the things that I have up here on the slide for this evening are inaccurate, but the one thing that is accurate, I have the Finding Connection Workshop for couples. That'll be run by my wife, Michelle, and myself, Brad. That'll be in June of this year. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in attending a workshop with your spouse, if you want to come to a Finding You and you've always wondered, can I do this with my spouse? The answer typically for us is no. But the Finding Connection Workshop is that offering. It's Finding You for couples. So we take 4 couples and we do essentially the same curriculum, the same exercises. But if you want to build a bridge between you and your spouse, if you want to, like I often talk about, learn to understand and fall in love with your partner's dilemma, understand where they're coming from, this is that offering. If you're interested in a private intensive, you can contact us at info@findingyouprograms.com. All feedback, all requests. I'm going to be doing a live Q&A of this broadcast next week, and that's the same place you can send those questions to. All things Finding You, we can be reached at info@findingyouprograms.com. I wrote about this story in The Audacity to Be You. I'd recently heard my friend and colleague Harriet Lerner give a talk on shame, the primary energy fueling resistance. After her prepared talk, the host asked her a few questions from the audience and started with this one. He asked, "How do you deal with shame in therapy?" Dr. Lerner paused for a moment and then said plainly, "I think you're just asking me how to do therapy." When we think about resistance in therapy, especially when we think about it for our younger therapists, most often it's thought about as something to get past, something to get through, something to get over and around. And once we do that, we imagine then the real instructive, illuminating work of therapy can begin. But resistance is the treatment area in the way that we think about this. Resistance is the shame. It is the fear. It is the guilt, the confusion, the fear of not knowing that blocks our ability to grow. And so part of this broadcast tonight, again, using the concepts from therapy and resistance, are to help us understand when we have a loved one that's struggling, when we are struggling with our own resistance. How many times have you said to yourself or heard somebody say, I know the right things, but I'm not able to do it. I understand myself, but that seems to not be making the difference that I would hope for in my life. We're really talking about the resistance to change. And in the spirit of all things Finding You, what we say about that fear to change is you must have a good reason. I've talked about this idea that sometimes therapists or programs are quick to cite the slogan that is so popular in the field of therapy of trusting the process. Or I know in my career, we've talked about so much about this idea about, especially when treating young people, do you trust the client? Do you trust what they're saying? But the real question is not whether or not we trust them, but whether or not they trust us. And if they don't trust us, simply saying something like trust the process is extraordinarily dismissive. We are, in essence, in that moment, we are subscribing or inviting other people to describe to that idea of trusting the process. We are suggesting that the wound, the trauma, is somehow invalid or should be ignored or should be swept under the rug. The resistance is the trauma response. It will lead us. If we listen to it, if we attend to it, if we understand it, it will lead us to the fundamental wound anyway. And when we are led to the fundamental wound, when we shed light and love on that wound, understanding and compassion on that wound, that is when it heals. So we don't think of the idea at Finding You of trust the process. We think of the slogan, come as you are. We think about it with our individual therapy clients, our coaching clients. We think about it in terms of our participants in our intensive, that whatever distrust you have is something that you came to honestly. And to simply dismiss or go around or bully or go through that, we would rather pause and understand, to listen. I love these two quotes. Somebody said, I did not come to teach you. I came to love you, and love will be your teacher. Love will teach you. That is, in essence, what we're talking about. Now, I want to pause right here about something. This is very important to me. I hear very often reports from the therapists that I work with or from clients, this idea of compassion that I have, this idea of understanding, of containing our children, that somehow it robs us of the opportunity to take care of ourselves, to protect ourselves, to stand up for herself. And I want to be as clear and plain as I can about that in any relationship. That's not what I'm suggesting. I think the reason I'm talking about this idea of containing, of holding space for, of having compassion for others, I think I'm talking about that so often because that is what's missing in the equation. But I do realize what is missing so often also in the equation is that the person that I'm talking to doesn't have a strong sense of themselves, doesn't know that they are, if you will, the last line of defense to protect themselves. You have a right in any relationship, in any conversation, in any circumstance to say enough is enough. There's nothing wrong or there's no failure in that. It is just an acknowledgement of your humanness. So yes, I'm going to talk about treating resistance today, but I don't want you to hear, no matter what relationship you're considering this teaching, this podcast in, I don't want you to hear me sweeping away the idea that you're allowed to, and it's even appropriate for you to take care of yourself. That is your first responsibility. I think what happens for people, instead of assertively and clearly taking care of themselves, they make it about the other person. They say you're too much this or too much that, or not enough this or not enough that. Instead of saying, this is my limit. This is as much as I can deal with. I need a timeout. I need a break. I need to go recharge. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm exhausted. I'm at my limit, and I need a break. And I want to be as clear as I can at the outset of a podcast where I'm going to be talking a lot about compassion for others. I want to be as clear as I can that is part of, and even the foundation of, all aspects of connection. If you can't clearly and assertively take care of yourself, if you don't attend to that task, then intimacy is not real intimacy. It's really an abandonment of self, a fusion. It's selflessness. It's having no self. And while that might not challenge somebody's resistance, that might not provoke it and make it worse, in the big picture, it does nothing to further the relationship. It doesn't make the other person account for the presence of an other. I asked my therapist many years ago this question, and she taught me something very important. I said, in our relationship with our child, And I was talking about this ideal of holding space for them. And she said, you know, underneath that, behind that, you have to take care of yourself. It's okay. It's human. In fact, it's important to model for your children to take care of themselves. And I said, would it be ideal for a child's development for somebody to have perfect capacity, a limitless supply of capacity? And she said, I can't even understand why that would be helpful for a child practically, because then they would never have to deal with the presence of an other. In some ways, I think that's the dynamic and culture sometimes we see in today's parenting, because there's this radical shift away from really closed, rigid parenting, autocratic and authoritarian parenting, because we're trying to shift away from that. So many of us were wounded by that as children, that we swing the pendulum too far in the other direction. And we say the child's needs are the only ones that ought to be considered in this equation. And that's just not true. That doesn't help the child. But what I want to add to the equation is that you can take responsibility for your needs. Instead of saying, this is for your own good, I only do things for you because I love you. All of me is motivated by love for you. You can say, no, that's not true. I need this for me. I have to take care of myself. And then what you ultimately have to face is your own shame. If you were treated by a rigid narcissistic parent, you'll have to face that fear that you've become them. You've started to sound like and talk in ways that might approximate, at least on the surface, that same kind of personality that you were wounded by. So in our attempts to not be our narcissistic, rigid, uncaring, unempathic, autocratic, authoritarian parents, we swing towards selflessness, which does not really solve or address the problem. It just passes it on to the next generation. We raise, in essence, children who become like our parents, who don't have to find that balance in relationship between self and others, because they don't have to consider another person, because the other person really isn't present in the psychological sense of the word. Rumi said, don't force a rose to bloom. It will open when kissed by the sun. In a lot of ways, this idea of responding to resistance has to be based in love, compassion, understanding. I love the idea from Thich Nhat Hanh, who says that understanding is love's other name. I've written the idea that you can't really love somebody, not deeply, unless you understand them. Because if you don't understand them, it's really not them that you love. It's some other idea, some other version of them besides their true or authentic self. So we love and have compassion for others. And that is born out of, first off, our own self-love, our own self-respect, our own sense of self, our own self. One of the themes that I'll be talking about throughout, that I talk about in psychotherapy, and if I were giving a subtitle to tonight's broadcast, it would be relationships that are informed by therapy, by the therapy relationship, is the idea that when we're up against somebody's resistance, even our own, instead of fixing the resistance or making it go away, we try to find and understand what's going on. And when we do that, we address the problem at its root. Following that analogy of the root, instead of just chopping off the weeds at the surface, we get all the way down deep into the mud. And we address all of it. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote in his book, You Are Here, when the other person realizes that his or her presence has been recognized and confirmed, he or she will blossom like a flower. To be loved is to be recognized as existing. Have you looked at others this way? If you embrace them with the energy of mindfulness, with your true presence, notice how he talks about that idea of your true presence. This energy is completely nourishing. It is like water for a flower. A flower needs water to live, and the person you love needs your presence. Your presence is the most precious gift that you can give to him or her. That's why, another way of talking about that famous quote from Carl Jung that says, that the greatest burden on a family or on a child is the unlived life of a parent. If a parent doesn't have a self, which means that you embrace not just the good, the talented, the bright and shiny, the pretty and handsome parts of yourself, successful parts of yourself, but you embrace all of yourself, the good, the bad, and everything in between. That is what is required in this equation of meeting somebody's fear and resistance and shame. Your presence is the most precious gift that you can give to him or her, Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say. And his famous mantra is, quote, "Dear one, I am here, really here for you." All of us can practice this mantra, he says, and it really works. I want to take a moment and remind you that resistance or defensiveness, those are somewhat synonymous. Resistance or defensiveness doesn't feel like it on the inside. While it's very apparent to us from an outside perspective when we're looking at somebody else, it doesn't feel like that to the person exhibiting it. Defensiveness doesn't feel like defensiveness to the one exhibiting it. It feels like, quote, "They don't understand me. They don't see the whole picture," unquote. So the task is to find and understand the other. This compassion, this understanding is the precondition for transformation. It is the balm that heals. It is the medicine that our souls seek. It is something as a human being that everybody needs. Even those who have convinced themselves because they never got in childhood, even the ones who have convinced themselves that they don't need it. I love the boldness of what Dr. Gill says in one of her books. She writes, "Both cruel people and inadequate therapists are famous for a desire to destroy defenses without considering the consequences." I can see that in my children. I can see my desire to destroy their defenses, to steal their crutches, to rip the Band-Aid off. I can see where that comes from in my own childhood. I did not have the luxury, having suffered more instead of abuse, more abandonment than anything else. I did not have the luxury in many ways of being a child, of really living my childhood. So I had to learn to grow up really quickly, like a lot of people did in my generation, in the Gen X generation. And because of that need, that requirement of my own childhood, I want my child to be wise, smart, put together, grounded adults. I can become very impatient, very angry at their defenses, very angry at their resistance. We get angry at people who exhibit things that we weren't allowed to show in our childhood. We get angry at our spouses. Again, borrowing from Carl Jung, who is so quotable. Everything that irritates us about somebody else can give us insight into ourselves. I look at the characteristics of the people around me and what I get irritated about in them. And that will tell you. Once you learn to understand how to see things, it will tell you about my childhood. It will tell you about the aspects, the personality characteristics that I had to abandon just to survive. I've thought about this idea about interpretation in psychotherapy. I hear so often people say, I have so much self-awareness, and it's not really helping. And on one level, that makes sense, and that resonates with most of us. But deeply, compassionately understanding ourselves does make a difference in every case. It means that we've learned, we've developed the ability to love ourselves so profoundly that we can see aspects of ourselves that we couldn't when we held criticisms and judgments in our hearts. So when somebody tells me that self-awareness hasn't helped me, my first thought is, what's missing here is self-compassion. In a lot of ways, I don't think of psychotherapy as fixing or improving somebody, although that happens. People do resolve issues and problems and challenges in their life. People do progress. That happens in psychotherapy. That's not the way that I think about it, or I try not to think about it that way. I think about it as understanding yourself. Long before you're able to heal the wounds and therefore not need the symptoms or the defenses or the resistance to prop yourself up. Long before that, you'll have compassion in looking at yourself honestly. You'll forgive yourself. You'll know this is my issue. This is what I do in relationships. That is, for me, so much the goal of psychotherapy. When I'm working with a client, they said, here's what I did with my spouse. Here's what I did with my child. Here's what I did at work. I have this thing that I do when I get scared. Gosh, I have this issue with doing X or Y or Z in relationships. My thought, my words are often, great job. I said this recently to a client, complimenting them on their awareness of their mental illness, if you will, their patterns. And I complimented them and said, great job talking about it. And they said to me, great job for recognizing how screwed up I am. And I said, yes. That's the outcome of psychotherapy that J.D. Gill talks about when she says that's the thing about psychotherapy. The news gets worse and worse. That's what she means. The wisest among us are able to look at themselves, their flaws, their imperfections, their humanness without judgment. They look at them in a way that they understand and see them. They keep them in front of them. They don't fantasize, oh, I can fix this neurotic neuroses. I can fix this neuroses. The minute that people get on that track, my thought is, you're at risk. You're at risk for denial, for shoving that aspect of yourself into the unconscious. In an article that I wrote for a journal, I wrote, therapy has become problem solving rather than a process of the discovery of who we are. The discovery of self, or who we are, is not fostered by giving advice or answers, but rather by asking better questions. As Gill wrote, she refers to this advice giving form of therapy as abuse. She says, the therapist or guide we choose must not duplicate the wounds of the past. Thus, if the therapist or guide knows what is right for us and manipulates us to achieve these treatment goals, it is abuse, plain and simple. It is hard to see how good abuse ever cures bad abuse. Essentially, that's what our parents have tried to do. And doesn't that make sense? That's what we try to do to our children. That's what we try to do to our spouse, and they try to do to us. We try to manipulate them to achieve what we perceive to be a healthier path, a non-toxic path. But if the goal of psychotherapy is, as we think of it at Finding You programs, if it is to become who you are, then manipulating somebody to do something doesn't make any sense. It is to slow down, to take a moment, to listen, to understand, to see whatever the toxic or unhealthy behavior is in a different light. And when we look at it from that different perspective and that different light, we follow it back and we find out where the trauma, where the wound is, and we attend to it compassionately. And when we can, in ourselves or in another person that we love or that we care about, whether it's somebody in our personal life or somebody that we serve in a therapeutic context, when we can make the connection between the unhealthy, negative behavior, whatever you want to call it, disgusting, stupid, ignorant behavior, pathological, toxic behavior, when we can make the connection between that and the injured child, it loses its power. It loses its hold on us. The child is never going to be able to undo the wound. The wound will always exist. You can't make it not so. But it can be transformed into something different. Right? Every wound has its gift. The fact that I sit here and talking to you today is in large part because of the wounding that I experienced as a child and the work that I've done around it to understand it. Anything I have to offer is because I have struggled with these issues. Every one of the things that I'm talking and teaching to you is grounded and rooted in my wounded and my trauma. And I can talk about it and I can self-disclose and use myself as an example because it's the thing that's most obvious to me, that I know the best. I also do it in a sense to invite you into that safe space. Other lessons for therapy, something that I wrote. When you become frustrated or disappointed with a client, or other people for that matter, you have in some sense lost contact with them. If you could really see them, especially those that are so hard to see and make it so hard to love, if you could really see them, connect to them, you would not be frustrated with them. You would understand them. See, that's what interpretation does. It's de-shaming. It takes the charge out of it. Attachment theory tells us that a person's sense of well-being is the result of having a parent who provided them this kind of space, this kind of understanding and compassion, and we call that the container. An adequate container is the mind of the therapist, the mind of the parent, the mind of the other, where the child or partner experiences himself or herself as welcomed and safe. If the parent, speaking of the child, if the parent is able to hold the child in her mind, that is, tolerate the child, then the child's experience is, I'm okay. Same in psychotherapy, same in marriage. I ascribe a lot of my healing to my therapist, but I will give a lot of credit to my wife too. I said this to her last night, just in casual conversation. This is the kind of thing that we say all the time. We were sitting at dinner with my daughter, and there was some playful banter about something. And I said, the fact that you haven't killed me at this point, I said to my wife, tells me that you love me. Because you have justification to do all kinds of horrible things to me, and you haven't done it. And that's the love that I feel. When a parent's limitations are expressed in disappointment, disgust, anger, the child is likely to interpret this message as, I'm not okay. See, the child doesn't think, oh, my parent's got an anger problem. That's not what the child thinks. And that would be easy if the child thought that. We probably wouldn't need psychotherapists if the child was able to externalize it. But they don't. They think something's wrong with me. My parents' frustration and disappointment is my failure, is evidence of something in me that is fundamentally wrong. The child interprets the parent's anger as, I'm not okay, in order to manage this feeling of dread, which is terrifying to the child, because if the child is abandoned, there's no hope. So the child learns to put away things, to relegate personality characteristics, traits in response to the unconscious. Somebody asked me the other day this question, what about the rebellious child who seems to have no interest in pleasing the parents? And that's just something that Freud termed reaction formation. It's kind of like when you're in grade school and you have a crush on somebody, and so you tease them and pick on them and make fun of them. You communicate that you don't love them. It is doing the opposite, to hide. It's the same, I think it's the quote from Shakespeare that says, methinks thou dost protest too much. Rebellion is still a sign in the child or in the other that the person is overwhelmed by the expectations of others. Summarize from the drama of the gifted child. It's really important for me to communicate this, and I'll talk about this a couple of times tonight. Communication theory has its place, there's no doubt. Learning how to speak assertively and clearly about feelings and thoughts. Learning how to own your feelings and not project them onto other people, making them about the other person. Those are all important aspects of communication theory. Becoming well-versed in communication theory creates a kind of communication that is less accusing, that is less likely to provoke the defense, the resistance in the others. But where it falls short is it doesn't hide the underlying feelings and beliefs of the person. You might say the perfect thing, say it perfectly according to communication theory. But what really gets communicated from person to person is energy. And so I summarize something that Alice Miller wrote in The Drama of the Gifted Child this way. This is partly her and partly me. The therapist or spouse or parent may cloak his disapproval and derision behind abstract terms like borderline, obsessive, regression, destructive. But unless he explores the 3-year-old boy inside of himself, he will not see the parallel between these terms and garden variety contempt. I was training a therapist not too long ago who gave a presentation to a group of parents and came back and said to me, gosh, it was really difficult. Everybody was really resistant to some of the things that I was teaching. And we talked about it. And I said, first of all, they have to know that you love them. I don't mean intimately love them, but they have to know that you have compassion and non-judgment. One of the ways that I try to communicate that is by self-disclosure. I am with you. I am on this journey with you. We're the same. Fundamentally, we're the same. You communicate energetically that you love and you care and you have compassion for others. And then you can say a lot of things that people can hear. But if you don't address either the energy coming from you or that they carry around with them all the time, this feeling of feeling unsafe, judged, threatened, not good enough, not worthy of love and connection, if you don't address that dynamic in the exchange between two people, you can get away with almost saying nothing. There's nothing that will sink through, nothing difficult, challenging, uncomfortable that will be heard. Gil wrote that safety is not the precursor to treatment. Safety is the treatment. Part of what we try to create in our relationships, even today and in my own family relationships, is even with the people that I've injured, my own children, is a sense of safety. Every day, I become aware of ways in which I am unsafe for others. Every day I see a new aspect or behavior in myself that contributes to a lack of connection or intimacy in my close relationships. Every day I see ways that I fail or fall short with my clients. Not from a shame and I have to be perfect, but I just see it. I'm in touch with it. I keep it before me. And I realize how it affects the relationship, how it affects the other person. Again, from the article that I wrote for the journal, therapy is not a place that we go to listen to difficult things, but a place that we go in order to share difficult things. And if that's true, it has to be safe. You don't have intimacy, your child doesn't talk to you, begin to look at what hand you have in that dynamic. People don't like hearing that. Because again, why do we not like hearing that? Because we want the problem to be in the other person. My husband doesn't talk about his feelings. Well, that might be true. And if we looked into his background, we would find really good reason for that. But here's the kicker. They end up in many ways marrying people who broadly behave like their original context, like their parents. Again, you will look different than you will have a different job, you might have a different level of education, there's going to be many different aspects, but Fundamentally, when we're talking about differentiation, that sense of self, that ability to love another compassionately, that's what they gravitate toward. So if your spouse doesn't share their feelings with you, spend time with them in couples therapy or in individual therapy for you and find out how you might have a hand in that. Does your child lie to you? Well, maybe they're just trying to get out of trouble. That's what most parents think that it is. And there is a large part of it that is that. But almost always, in addition to them trying to get out of trouble, get out of consequences, there's shame. There's a lack of emotional safety. So therapy is a place that we go to say difficult things. Relationships are scary. It is absolutely terrifying to be in a relationship without your armor for all of us. One of the authors of this paper, this was me, and you've heard this story. The article was written by myself and my wife. Heard a therapist say to a client, if you came to a session and told me you were in love with a chicken, I'd assume you had a good reason. I'd be curious. Like, it's that level of compassion. You have to get out of your own mind. You have to see the world through the other person's eyes. That's what it means to understand somebody. From their perspective, can you see why everything makes sense? James Hollis says that even psychosis makes sense. I had a client say to me recently, she said, I'm engaging in old behaviors and it makes no sense. It's irrational. And I said to her, it's not. It's not irrational. We just haven't discovered together what it serves, how it serves you. And I think if your symptomology, I told her, were to explode, if your behaviors were to destroy relationships at work and at home, you would become clear really quickly on the purpose that it was serving, on what need was being met by your destructive behaviors. So instead of waiting for that to happen, let's really dig in now and see. That's why I don't like the phrase, the term self-sabotage. I just don't like the term self-sabotage because on one level it is that. But on the level that I'm talking about today, it's self-preservation. Somebody who sinks their own ship, as I like to say, who fails because the risk of trying and failing is too great, and so they just give up or fail. That's not self-sabotage in my book. That is preservation of a sense of safety. That is taking their power back, remaining in control, because in previous situations they were not in control and that felt too vulnerable. Yes, it does look like sabotaging on the surface. Whatever task that we were discussing is now not realized. But self-sabotaging still has that connotation that the person is fundamentally flawed. And the thing about it is human beings are adaptive. At some level, the craziest behavior makes sense. It is this kind of container that I'm describing today that allows us to re-experience ourselves and rid ourselves of shame. And after the shame subsides, we can be in relationship to the wound. We can attend to it. We can love ourselves. Jamie Gill wrote in the foreword of The Audacity to Be You, what does a well-trained therapist look like? A well-trained therapist is an expert at listening. She told me one time, one way to make sure that you're not a narcissist is listen well. If you can listen well, really hear the other person, that's an indication, an index of your lack of narcissism. A well-trained therapist, she says, is an expert at listening. He or she wants to hear how you feel, not how you are supposed to feel. He or she will try to find you where you are. He or she will try to find out how it feels to be you with your history, your dilemmas, your hopes and fears. If, instead of trying to If instead of trying to hear you and find you, your therapist has the right answer for you, find another therapist. The right answer will always be the therapist's answer and not your answer. And this will likely duplicate the ways that you were treated by your parents. At the base, the core, the driving energy of resistance, we find fear. Like I said, it might look like rebellion and anger, but it's really fear, a loss of control, a fear of having your identity swallowed up. Shame and guilt are the usual suspects when we think about resistance. Going back to Dr. Lerner's quote, when she responded to the facilitator at the conference that I was at, when he asked the question, how do you deal with shame in therapy? She said, I think you're just asking me how I do therapy. And that's why the therapists who come in as warriors, so proud and self-satisfied with how well they confront. I did that as a father. I actually remember, I've never said this exactly, but I remember during my master's degree, I was in many ways the least afraid to do therapy in front of the class. We had to do role plays, and I had more experience, and so I was comfortable in this area. And I would demonstrate a really confrontive stance, a clever, smart, articulate, surgical-like confrontation. And I remember my kind professor one day said, I see you as kind of a warrior therapist. At the time, I took some pride and thought it was a compliment. Now today, I think he may have been trying to gently communicate to me that if I came in as a warrior, that the other person might remain on the defense. So many therapists, especially young therapists, and I think this is in large part a measure about how little deep work they have done, shadow work they've done on themselves. So many therapists pride themselves on their ability to confront. As a father and a family member, I've done that too. I took great pride in confronting my children's defenses, pointing out, using my, what I like to call my X-ray vision, and saying, this is the issue. This is what's underneath your defense. This is why you lied. This is why you did this. And now I realize how cruel and self-serving that was of me to say that. My therapist said to me one time, when discussing my parenting, she said, remember that you can't strip the other person of their dignity. And that was humbling, because I have done that many times. The younger the individual, the therapist, the more likely they are to do that in many cases, unless they've learned this lesson in some other way. That's why graduate students are really difficult family members to be around, because they get well equipped and armed with all of these skills and tools and ideas, and they come around just shooting at any target that moves in their family. Mom, you're this. Mom, you're this. Dad, you're that. Dad, you're that. So husband, wife, sister, brother, child, you're that. But the fact of the matter is, when we think about therapy, we think of somebody who's patient and kind, who's understanding. We don't think of a surgeon. We think of kind of a midwife. Somebody who's there to support you, to sit with you, to co-regulate with you, to offer comfort. Gentle coaching when it's time. But somebody that's going to help you give birth. Painfully, of course. To a more evolved, new version of yourself. Sometimes we think of resistance as confusion or ignorance. I will tell you, that is overestimated by most people. Because most people think that what the person needs to do is have a clearer explanation. I just have to give a new analogy. I just have to show them how their resistance and their defensiveness is hurting them. I have to show them how their behavior or their symptoms are causing bigger problems. That's what most people want to say. They just don't understand. But that's not the problem with resistance, them not understanding. The problem with resistance is they don't think we understand. The problem with resistance or defensiveness is that they haven't been understood in the past. So overestimating that it's about more information is a common error that we make when dealing with resistance. Resistance can look like not understanding, being confused. That's why it's so easy to fall into that trap. I was one time sitting in a presentation with one of our therapists to a group of psychologists. And it was a wonderful presentation. And they were asking the audience about various ways that clients show up with resistance. And there were great examples. But the one term that never got volunteered was cooperation. Cooperation is one of the most common forms of resistance. The psychological or psychoanalytic term for cooperation is introjection. Introjection is swallowing the idea whole without digesting, without chewing on it, without measuring it against one's own internal sense of self, one's own internal compass. Maybe because the person doesn't have much of an internal sense of self or compass. That's the most likely scenario or dynamic that's going to lead to introjection or hyper cooperation. And remember, if what I teach about psychotherapy and psychology is true, we must consider that every client is going to try to take care of us, make us happy, make us feel good as a therapist, please us, make us proud, make us think that they are wonderful, wonderful children. That is why it's so important that when a client can get upset and confront you, that you take that golden moment, that golden opportunity to listen. So pleasing behaviors are resistance also. Sometimes it can look run-of-the-mill fighting non-compliance in a power struggle. But again, in many ways, I would rather deal with that than the cooperation, because I can be seduced by cooperation. There's still a part of me that wants to be the guru, wants to be the savior or the hero therapist. And fighting doesn't do that. Fighting wakes me up to the fact that we have some deeper work to do. Rationalizing, justifying, intellectualizing. Again, like I often talk about, it's not a skill really that I talk and teach at all to point out somebody's resistance, to point out somebody's rationalizing or justifying. It is to show up to that person, that client, that loved one in such a way that there's no threat, that they can simply tell the truth. I love when clients are in that middle ground, that middle place where they I'll hear clients or loved ones qualify. Like, I know I shouldn't say this, or I know this is wrong. I know this isn't always fit, but they're trying to preemptively stave off the attack. And when I hear that, I either hear that that's their background, they had to be right, or that I've done something to suggest that they have to be right instead of just who they are. Forgetting to make an appointment, missing an appointment, that can be resistance. Forgetting things. It's that old saying that I'm sorry I'm late, I just didn't want to come. That's the forgetting resistance. Avoiding, not talking about, missing appointments, not doing assignments, sabotaging things, denial. Remember that resistance is not necessarily conscious. I talk about it as if it's conscious because it serves something in the psyche, but this is rarely a conscious experience. Believing that any of this doesn't apply to us. When I teach therapists, and I'm looking to do a keynote on this at an upcoming conference. When I teach therapists about doing their own work, I'm going to say to them, I've sat in rooms with hundreds of therapists over my career who have complained about spouses or parents who haven't done their work. But when I ask the crowd the rhetorical question, the audience the rhetorical question, how many of you are regular therapy participants? If you're not in therapy now, I would offer the possibility that you're not creating the safest environment for your client, because that suggests to me that you think you're beyond it, and you're not. None of us are. To provoke the defense, to make the defense worth, to provoke the resistance, we do so much. We do so much in our relationships inadvertently to make the defense or the resistance worse. If the spouse that you're thinking about doesn't open up and share, it's so easy to say, you need to be ruthlessly honest. You need to be vulnerable. I even hear the therapist Terry Real talk about this a lot, that men who don't share their feeling need to take responsibility for their emotional lives. That all may be true. But if we don't look at the thing systemically, when the person does express disappointment, anger, frustration at their partner, does the partner listen? Or does the partner discount, dismiss because of their own ego? Do they say things like, that's just not the truth? This is how you're wrong. Do we have a hand in the behaviors in our families, in our clientele? Do we have a hand at contributing to the very problem that we're complaining about and that we're seeing? This is really pragmatic, not ideological. When I'm in therapy, I'm looking at what works. And when people pull away people's crutches, steal people's crutches, pull off the Band-Aid, when they stand like the warrior and tell the other person how it is, and the other person's defense goes higher and thicker and longer, when the person doesn't come back to therapy, when the person walks away, who's exactly served by that? Who's getting served by that warrior stance, by that surgical stance? And what I would offer is the only person being served by that is the ego of the warrior themselves, that they get to stand on the holier than thou throne, that they were right. Ultimately, the best way at helping people to grow and heal and expand is not to confront the defense. And the research is clear, both in parenting and in psychotherapy and in couples. Motivational Interviewing is a wonderful book if you're interested in research-driven information on this topic. It is absolutely has an exhaustive bibliography of research that shows what I'm talking about. So when somebody wants me to confront their spouse, and that's why couples therapy and family therapy can be so difficult, because others in the family really want me to lay into the person whose symptomology might be the most obvious. We'll get there, but not in the way that you think, not using the vehicle or the message that you think. I often would say to my clients in group therapy who would complain about the group not being safe, I would say, why don't you start by taking off your armor, by laying down your weapons, by sharing your vulnerability? The best way to make a relationship safe is to share your vulnerability. Now, it has risks. Once you have been vulnerable, you can be hurt. But the more work that you do, it really doesn't hurt that much. Once you build up the base, doesn't matter what they think or say about you, because the matter has been settled by you and your own therapy and your own soul. Lowering your defenses is the best way to lower theirs. Modeling for our children accountability. You want your child to get better? Go to therapy. You want your child to get better? Go to Finding You. You want your spouse to get better? Go to Finding You. You got a problem with the people in your practice? Go do your own work. Do the thing that you would have them do. Show them how to do it. This is, of course, way beyond winning and getting it right. This is showing them the difference that therapy could make in their life by showing them the difference it's making in your life. And when therapy has its effect on us, we are more loving, kind, compassionate, humble, more connected. When I talk about honoring the defense, I'm talking about listening to it, valuing it, understanding how it's served and protected us. All we're doing in psychotherapy is treating resistance. And the way that we do it at Finding You, the goal is to understand you, not fix you, but understanding you fixes you. The goal is to love you, not to change you, but love changes you. If you can remain curious in a relationship, that's a good sign that you're not being triggered. That's a good sign that you're not participating in a dance or a dynamic that is provoking the defense, provoking the resistance. Accept that people are going to take a lifetime. Except if you know yourself, you realize that your issues are taking a lifetime. See, that's the thing about psychotherapy. When people say, I know myself, I think, well, if you did, you would have so much more patience for the entire world, for everybody in it. Because if you really knew yourself, you would see that you are like all of them in small ways. Honoring the defense is to honor the feelings and the feelings that the other has toward you. They must have a good reason. I want to understand. It's not just honoring the positives. It's not, intimacy is not warm and fuzzy and pink and hearts and chocolates and roses. It's learning to see our part. It's doing our work. It's taking the responsibility back for our own serenity so that everybody else isn't given that burden. They may be the other person might be saying something crazy or acting crazy, but telling them that won't help. That's the simplest way to say it. Sometimes you can identify with the defense. You can see it in yourself. Like I said, let yours down first. Continue to not know and to be curious. And like I said at the outset, honoring the defenses is not to not have any boundaries. It just means that your boundaries are for a different reason, come from a different place. They come for self-care and self-protection, not to change other people. From the book Addictive Thinking by Abraham Tversky. He writes, the mother of a young man was destroying himself with alcohol and other drugs, and she could not understand how he could be so oblivious to the disastrous effects that chemicals were having on his life. She asked for help in dealing with him. But, she said, don't tell me I have to put him out of the house or that I should not bail him out of jail. She said, I don't want to hear that. I responded, he said, please tell me how much is 2 + 2, but don't say 4. She had, he wrote, been unable to see that her own thinking was no less distorted than her son's. That is the gift of leaning into our own work. When a therapist engages the defense, it feels like the therapist repeating themselves over and over again, trying to make their point. And it feels to the client like they don't get me. When you engage the defense, you're making it about you. You're not seeing the other person. It's personal for you. And that's going to happen to all of us in families, right? It can happen to us in therapy too. The key is not seeing how different you are from other people. That's the easy thing. That's the trauma response, largely speaking. Mental health is when you see yourself and everybody else. We can become symptom focused. Seeking advice about what to do instead of thinking about the dynamics about what are going on is a difference that I'm talking about. I don't think of psychotherapy as do this or do that. I don't think of helping my children as do this or do that. I think of helping them evolve and grow in such a way that the things that they do make their lives more peaceful. We have to own our own shame. We have to own our own darkness. If we do not take responsibility for our lives, we will make everybody else outside of us overtly and covertly responsible for our serenity. We will make the badness about them. When I wrote The Journey of the Heroic Parent and named it that, I had to come up with a definition, what I thought heroic parenting meant. What was a heroic parent? And the answer is simple. A heroic parent is the parent who's willing to look at themselves and subsequently see how they might have contributed to or are still contributing to the problem, to the issue before them. Melanie Klein, one of the masters, talked about the 2 stages of human development. We start off in this paranoid phase that many people never get past. In fact, I think most people don't get past, where they think that the problem is out there and the solution is out there. But she said some people get to what she called the depressed position, where the person realizes, I am responsible for the happiness or lack of it in my life. Go to meetings, go to therapy. Get larger. Become who you are. And when you do that, you'll be a better spouse, a better parent, and a better friend. You won't fix the other person, but you won't be a part of the problem anymore. I've talked about the word containing. Containing is holding space for, having compassion for, remaining curious, not reacting. The question of how can I be more helpful is more important than what I think you need to do to change. Containing means finding and hearing and seeing and understanding the other person. And recognizing that our frustration, anger, disappointment, anxiety, fear, and judgment are all evidence of our disconnection from the other person. Jamie Gill wrote, the contained is more or less fully felt and understood by the container. At the same time, the container can rely on additional resources. They are the adult in the room, so to speak. And with these additional resources, they can feed back to the contained, to the child, to the spouse, to the client, a wider sense of the experience, a bigger perspective, a different perspective. Along with this is the experience that the container can adequately accept and manage what is being offered. When so many parents think that when they say to their child, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not sleeping at night, I can't eat, I'm so worried, I'm so fretting, they imagine that they're communicating love. When they're just really communicating their own human inadequacy. But they're doing it in such a way to make the other person responsible. Do you hear that? And the great Carl Rogers wrote, when a person realizes he has been deeply heard, his eyes moisten. I think in some real sense he is weeping for joy. It is as though he were saying, thank God somebody heard me. Somebody knows what it's like to be me. Seek first to understand. Communication skills and tools can be effective. They can teach you a new way of thinking, a new way of relating to yourself, to the aspects of yourself, to the energies that are inside of you, to your own trauma, your own wounds. They can help you to develop an ownership over your own feelings instead of making your child or your partner responsible for your feelings. But they don't do everything, because really what gets communicated is the energy, the feelings get communicated one way or the other. I have a chapter in my book, a podcast, and a blog on the 8 tools. The tools are fantastic, but what I'm talking about today is deeper and behind all of that. This is really motivational interviewing, and as it informs us with our relationships. At the end of the day, in fact, I wrote this next bullet point a few years ago, and I think there's a new book by Mel Robbins. It's The Theory of Let Them. Let them feel, think, or believe what they want. Let them. And remember that the relationship, the attachment, the safety trumps almost everything. And for it to be true safety, authentic safety, it must be built on a sense of self, in you, in me. Remember to separate your boundaries and your limits from the emotional messages that you want to share with the people around you. They're not the same thing. We conflate them often. Boundaries are for taking care of ourselves. This is what I can tolerate, what I can't, what I'm okay with, and what I'm not. They do teach lessons, but that's not their primary aim. They are to take care of ourselves. Learning to let go of outcomes means that we can tell the truth. That's the best way to think about letting go of the outcome, is telling the truth. You cannot win or control others. Most situations in life are not where everybody gets all of their needs met. You only get to choose how to lose. And remember, it's about love first. Like I said to that therapist that I was training who encountered great resistance in the parent group that she was teaching. Love first. And what that means is that we take care of ourselves first. Because love is a giving thing, not a taking thing. Love means I have enough left over for you. Love is not something we can draw upon from a dry well of our own being. Compassion is something that we develop as we do our work. And ultimately, we're all on the journey together. Be on the journey. Everybody listening to me, if you want to help people in your family, do your own work. It doesn't automatically fixes them, but it fixes your part in it and your relationship to them and their problems. For more, you can read The Journey of the Heroic Parent or The Audacity to Be You, available on Amazon and Audible. I will be running the intensive a week from tomorrow. We have a spot that I think I told you opened up recently. So if you want to come and work with me March 19th, let us know. I suspect that will fill up in the next day or so. So let us know. April 23rd will be the next Finding You after that. These are 4.5-day programs starting on a Wednesday evening, ending on a Sunday evening. I'll tell you about my attachment-based therapy class coming up, my conscious parenting workshop, and the Finding Connection workshop for couples run by myself and my wife, Michelle, is June 18th through 22nd. All things Finding You, signups, feedback, questions. I'm going to be doing a Q&A next week. All things Finding You, you can email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. You can go to our website also, of course. My next broadcast, like I mentioned, will be a Q&A. So any questions sent in via that email or sent in live, I will answer. That's next Tuesday, March 18th, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Tuesday, March 18th, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So I look forward to the questions. It's been a little while since I've done a Q&A. I look forward to that. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope this is a helpful point of contact in your week. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up to these and considering your part in things, doing your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday. Take care. Bye-bye.